Last time, Marius was desperately trying to defend Rome from Sulla's advancing forces. This time, we will follow the old soldier for one last great adventure. Marius's motley band of gladiators and slaves would never be a match for the professional troops of the Roman army, and he knew it. After a brief skirmish in the streets, Sulla took control of the city while Marius fled in the middle of the night. Plutarch tells us of his daring escape. His plan was to head from Rome to the port of Ostia. There, he would attempt a crossing to Africa, where he could link up with his veterans from the Jugurthine War. Surely, they would support him. As Marius ran, Sulla, now in total control of the city, passed the death sentence on him. He did this by declaring him a hostis. When the Senate declared someone a hostis, or enemy of the state, orders went out to every corner of the empire to kill the hostis on sight. Anyone caught harboring a hostis would likewise be killed. By all rights, Marius should have died that very day, or perhaps the next. But he put his faith in a prophecy that a seer once made when he was a child. The story went that as the young Marius walked through the woods, an eagle's nest fell into his hands from a tree. In the nest were 7 eagle chicks. The seer knew the meaning of the omen immediately. He would rise to the highest office in the land 7 times. That meant that Marius believed that he had one more consulship in store. But how could that possibly be? The fugitive Marius made it as far as the south coast of Italy when the weather stopped any further progress. There would be no crossing to Africa, yet he couldn't stay put. Without much in the way of food or options, Marius marched along the coast towards Minturnae, looking for a ship to take him to safety. At one point, his party spotted horsemen in the distance, obviously searching for them. Marius's companions threw themselves into the sea and swam out to the merchant ships offshore. The task was made more difficult for these men, since Marius was so fat that they had to hold him to keep his head above the water. The horsemen called out to the sailors, ordering them to either throw Marius overboard or surrender him immediately. The sailors, however, took pity on Marius, now a weeping mass, begging them for his life. They told the horsemen that they would not hand Marius over to them, since he was a hero of the Republic. Rather, they dropped him off on shore, some miles away, gave him provisions, and wished him luck. Now on shore, Marius wandered aimlessly, hoping to survive long enough so he might somehow escape to Africa. He stumbled upon the hut of an old man, and begged him for help, promising him riches beyond his wildest dreams if he did. The old man offered him his cabin for rest, but said that if he meant to elude the law, he had a better place in mind. The man led him to a marsh and told Marius to crouch in a hollow near the water. He then covered the once great general with reeds and left him there. Marius hid in the muck for a while before he heard horsemen approach and questioned the old man. This was enough to frighten Marius into throwing off the reeds, stripping himself naked, and attempting to flee through the marsh. But of course, he was quickly captured. The horsemen led him naked back to Minturnae, where he was handed over to the city authorities. The town council met there and sentenced Marius to death. Plutarch tells us that he was only saved by a mix of divine intervention and pity.
Kai ton men politon udes upestin to ergon, hippeos de Galates to...
No one of the citizens, however, would undertake the death of Marius. So a horseman, either a Gaul or a Cimbrian, for the story is told both ways, took a sword and went into the room where Marius was. Now that part of the room where Marius happened to be lying had not a very good light, but was gloomy. And we are told that to the soldier, the eyes of Marius seemed to shoot out a strong flame, and that a loud voice issued from the shadows saying, "Man, You dare to kill Gaius Marius?" At once then the barbarian fled from the room, threw his sword down on the ground, and dashed out of doors, with this one cry, "I cannot kill Gaius Marius." Consternation reigned, of course, and then came pity, a change of heart, a self-reproach for having come to so unlawful and ungrateful a decision against a man who had been the savior of Italy, and who ought, in all decency, to be helped. With that, the people of Minturnae provided Marius a ship and sent him on his way to Africa. Evidently, Marius found supporters there, both Numidian and Roman, who he enlisted as a small fighting force. Meanwhile, with the end of the year came a new set of consular elections. Sulla's unprecedented march on Rome and subsequent exile of Marius and his supporters was wildly unpopular, and Sulla paid for it in 87 BCE when he lost the consulship. Never mind that he wasn't eligible to run in the first place. Instead, two new consuls were elected. These were Gnaeus Octavius and Lucius Cornelius Cinna. Cinna, as an ally of Marius, was particularly hostile to Sulla. He ran on the promise of prosecuting Sulla for his illegal march on Rome as soon as he had left office. But it was not meant to be. Sulla just ignored the summons he received to stand trial for his illegal march, and instead hurried to Capua. There he took control of the southern army and sailed to Greece to fight against Mithridates VI, whether it was legal to do so or not. In Sulla's absence, the two sitting consuls, Cinna and Octavius, began to turn on one another. The fight this time was over how to distribute the newly minted citizens from the past several wars across Rome's traditional voting tribes. Cinna introduced legislation that would have evenly distributed the new citizens across all the tribes, whereas Octavius wanted them placed into newly created tribes. This was an important distinction, since distributing the new citizens across all the tribes would further erode senatorial power, while keeping them in specific tribes would dilute their voting power somewhat, thus containing the threat to the Senate. Cinna's law passed the Comitia Centuriata, but was vetoed by the tribunes of the plebs, and a riot ensued. Octavius managed to expel Cinna from the city, which began a fresh round of civil war. News of all of this reached Marius in Africa, who knew an opportunity when he saw one. He crossed back over to Italy with what few forces he had raised in Africa, and threw his lot in with Cinna. When Marius reached Italy, he seized the port of Ostia, cutting off the grain supply to the city of Rome and diverting it to his own forces. Then he linked his force with Cinna's. Together, Marius and Cinna marched on Rome. The Senate sent a delegation from the city to the combined army of Cinna and Marius, begging them to enter peacefully and forego a general slaughter in exchange for the Senate's submission. Marius demanded that the Senate gather and vote to recall him from exile before he would enter. The senators gathered at the usual spot, but Marius entered the city anyway before the vote could even be completed. From that day on, Marius was the ultimate law in the city of Rome. He killed all of his enemies, and his list of enemies seemingly grew by the day. The purge soon expanded from enemies to relatives of enemies, then to enemies of individual bodyguards in charge of enacting the purge in the first place. The city was gripped by a revolutionary reign of terror not before seen in the Roman Republic. Its purpose was intimidation. In furtherance of that goal, Marius had the heads of his murdered political enemies displayed in the forum. He and his goons didn't personally kill everyone. Many of his victims were found guilty in show trials and forced to commit suicide. Of course, this tyrannical junta reserved a special ire for Sulla. In short order, Marius's government had Sulla declared a hostis and stripped him of any proconsular command he might have once held in Asia, along with his army in the east. Now in this extra-legal position in the Roman Republic, Marius announced his candidacy for the consulship for the year 86 BCE. Unsurprisingly, he won. For the next 2 weeks, Marius could not sleep. He spent most nights drinking heavily. Some accounts say that he became delirious, barking commands to non-existent soldiers as if he were in a pitched battle. Others say that he came down with pneumonia at about this time. Whatever the ultimate cause, 2 weeks into his 7th consulship, Marius died. He was 70 years old. In the immediate aftermath, there was a new consular election, and Lucius Valerius Flaccus was elected to replace the now deceased Marius. He was dispatched to Greece to take control of the army away from Sulla. But that is a story better told in our next series, The Men Who Killed the Roman Republic, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Join me next time to evaluate the remarkable life of Gaius Marius, to better understand how much or little responsibility he bears for killing the Roman Republic. I'm Matt Lupu. Thanks for listening.